So right now on the screen, you should be seeing Ashley's picture and her background, and we're going to get into all of that. We're going to also hear about some of her investments, but I just wanted to make sure everyone got a sense of who you are, Ashley. I'm going to take that down though, and we're just going to have a chat, you and I, and get to share some conversation about you and your background and your thoughts on investing. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. So if you could just kind of start with general introduction. I'm curious. Let's start on a more human level than that even. How has your past year been? Even the past month, we know it's been a lot going on. So just let's check in on a human level and see how you're doing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's been an interesting year. I feel I've definitely felt, privileged to not, be affected, or health wise or career wise. And, I've kind of just used the opportunity to, used all the downtime actually really to kind of go further into venture and angel investing in a way that I would have never probably had the attention span for, or kind of had the motivation to do, but for things kind of locking down and me feeling like, all right, this was kind of go time. And I'm happy to get into that later. But it was actually kind of everything shutting down was actually what part of what inspired me to get going. On a few different fronts in angel investing. One, because I'm like, okay, there's no geographic disadvantage anymore being located in Florida. Anywhere in the world, anyone can do this because business is being transacted on computers, and not to mention it's highly scalable. You can wake up and you can be across the world in India and Pakistan or something on a time zone, and you can end your day on the West Coast and go as fast as you have kind of the tolerance for. So for me, it was beneficial in that regard in terms of being focused and having more clarity about what I wanted to do in this space, and then actually being strapped to my chair and going about doing it.
I think that's really well said. I would say that there's been a lot of things that have been pretty difficult about 2020, and even early 2021 had its blips. But one of the real positives for me, similar, was just all of a sudden the geographic boundaries that had been such a part of investing were gone. I want to welcome everyone. This is a new series we're going to be doing from Uncrowd, and Ashley, to let you know a little bit more. Really, what we try to do with Uncrowd is try to make venture capital, entrepreneurship accessible to founders. Our goal is to try to get more capital into the hands of people that don't have it. So we specifically are a product that's supposed to, that we focus on women, people of color, LGBTQ founders, and try to connect them with investors. And part of that is also ecosystem building. And I appreciate you coming tonight. What we're hoping to do is just let founders, anyone, but especially founders, get to hear firsthand from an investor and how you think, how you operate, how you ended up where you did. So if we could go back in time a little bit, I would love to know, I know you're now in Florida, but where did you grow up? How did you, where were you born? What was early life like?
Yeah, definitely the opposite of Silicon Valley. So I grew up in a town called Ocala, which is in Central Florida. It's kind of rural. It's known for horses, not a lot going on. Interestingly enough, a couple of interesting people happen to share that hometown who I don't know or have any affiliation with, but like Dustin Moskovitz, one of the Facebook co-founders and the founder of Asana. He went to my high school, didn't know him. He's a couple of years older than me. So I guess that's one of our other kind of claims to fame, but very, very small town, not much in the way of business or industry at all, let alone something like venture. Moved around a little bit as a kid, but was there for most of my life, all the way through college, and then ultimately ended up going to Duke for undergrad. I was a political science major, which I kind of fed into law school, and then ended up going straight through to Harvard for law school. And kind of how I designed my legal career and thereafter is I actually never wanted to practice law But, realistically, being a Black woman from the South who wanted to be conservative about career path and kind of having a safety net, I didn't even realize that, tech and all this stuff existed. I thought there were, if you were kind of a high performing person, like there was only a handful of career choices that I thought like you could take. But I kind of always had in my mind that I wanted to do something more, that I wanted to do something in investing, that I wasn't really like a quant person. And I was thinking that was the only way to get at it, like investment banking or something, but kind of kept that in the back of my mind, even as I kind of structured my legal career path.
I like how you just really casually glossed over that you went to Duke for your undergrad and then jumped straight from there to Harvard Law School. Just a couple like, no big deal. So with you kind of touched on that, but I'm curious. I'm assuming you were a high achiever early on. Tell me a little bit about just being a high achiever. Like what shaped that? What drove that? How did you? What was kind of pushing you? You were a poli-sci major at going to law school. So was politics in play? What did you want to be? What kind of led you down that path?
Yeah, so like I said, I don't think I kind of grew up. I didn't grow up knowing I wanted to be a lawyer or to do X, Y, and Z. Just growing up, I was just kind of always a self-starter. Like my parents were actually like fairly hands off and kind of let me do my thing. But I just kind of have, I don't know really exactly what I would ascribe it to, but I just kind of always had these bigger visions. And yeah, just a general product of my upbringing. Like my father and my stepfather. My father was more of a traditional corporate background, first person in the family to go to college and that kind of thing. He traveled extensively, and I kind of always kind of kept that in mind and that shaped things. Versus like my stepfather, didn't go to college, didn't have formal education, but was like equally successful professionally because he was just like an absolute hustler. And he was able to, get into corporate spheres and do deals and all these things just off the spirit of hustle. So I think I kind of my personality is kind of like the marriage of those two things, where it was motivated to go and get the credentials and do all of that, but there was still also this part of me that was kind of motivated by the hustle and realizing that can actually make up for a lot that the kind of the pedigree can't. And then just as I've gone on in life and business, I mean, the wealthiest people that I know, the most successful people I know, people that I work with and work for, are not Harvard, they're not Stanford, they're not Columbia or whatever. They're just hustlers who take advantage of opportunities. They're persistent. So that's just something that I've always kept in the back of my mind, but wanted to kind of get those credentials as, like I said, that kind of safety net.
I think you are. I don't want to jump ahead into when we've crossed paths, but I just want to. One of the things that I have appreciated, there are two things that I really like about you as an investor. And one of them is that you are exceedingly down to earth. You have every right not to be because of your pedigree and your success as an investor, but you are exceedingly accessible in a space where a lot of people are not. So I just want to share that I appreciate that about you. Um, what happened after law school? Catch us up to where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, was in law school. Like I said, I kind of had in my mind, I was like, I ultimately want to do something in business, but I was like, I'm not really quantitative, but I feel like I have some of the other things that are characteristic of maybe making someone excel in terms of the hustle, kind of the vision, the strategy, but wasn't really sure how to go about it. So I was like, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do in law, I was like, okay, right away I was like, I know I have to do corporate because I have to be around deals and I have to be around business people. I can't be in court with cases. So I immediately was like, all right, got that right away. I was like, I'm going to go corporate. And then even within corporate, I was like, okay, then I started to, as I was around, doing funds and doing internships in law school, I was like, okay, the kind of deals, the kind of people who I want to be in the room with, these are the people doing private equity and real estate and venture. I was like, okay, then I either need to do pure fund work or I need to do capital markets, which is debt, equity, everything around kind of securities and capital raising. I ultimately decided to do capital markets frankly, because it's you can work anywhere in the world doing it. And then at that time, I wanted to live abroad. I just wanted that experience. So I ended up I went directly from law school and started practicing in London, but I was practicing U.S. law on behalf of foreign companies that needed advice about New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, that kind of thing. So did that for a couple of years. Awesome experience, mid-20s, gallivanting all around Europe and working on these cross-border transactions and all of that. And then after a couple of years, I was kind of ready to come back stateside, decided to come to Florida, and ended up joining another law firm and lateraling. I mean, basically kind of to finance the move, because I kind of already knew from the time in London, I was like, okay, the next step, I know even if I keep practicing, I don't want to be at a law firm. Like I need to, it was always about how do I move closer to business and business people. So I was like, I need to work at a company. So as soon as like my bags were unpacked when I moved to Florida in 2013, I immediately it was like, went on the internet, went over whatever guide, looked up who are the best legal recruiters in South Florida. And then I met with all of them. And I was only had like two and a half years of experience. And I was like, I know like I'm extraordinarily young to be going in-house and working for a company, but I think I have all of this other experience and working internationally, and I think I can do it. Ended up, one of the recruiters, a month or so later, ended up having a position at the company I joined now, a different position I have now as a senior attorney. They were looking for someone with like 10 plus years of experience. And I'm like, if you can get me in the door, like this will be good for both of us. Like I know I'll be able to do it if I can just get to the interview stage of things, and was able to do it. Joined as senior attorney, and then now I was like, would have been the equivalent of a third-year associate in law school. And then 2 years later, was ultimately promoted to general counsel and a partner, and have been in that role ever since. And that group, it's basically, I'd say fun, but it actually, what we do is it's kind of actually more akin to what I do as a syndicate lead, in that we create SPVs relative to specific investment, pool funds relative to those specific investments, and returns are dictated based on the performance of the individual investments. And what we do is we make loans and investments on large scale real estate projects all over the country, but mostly in the Northeast. And as a result of that, now also find ourselves owning and operating some real estate assets at the moment, such as Nassau Coliseum out in Long Island in New York, and a couple of others.
Nice. Just to clarify, can you explain what an SPV is for anyone that might not know?
Yeah, so an SPV is just the shorthand for a special purpose vehicle. Sometimes you'll hear SPEs, special purpose entity, and it's literally just a company that is formed for a specific purpose. And so that language can apply to real estate, it can apply to private equity, it can apply to angel investing, where a company is not really meant to be an operating company. It's really meant to kind of pool capital or kind of be a conduit for something else in a transaction.
Thank you. That is, I mean, it's really impressive to have gotten that far at such a young age. I want to acknowledge that. But I also want to ask, so when did you start getting into investing? What was the move that brought you into making your own investments?
Yeah, so I guess I should have started back. I read this book, I think a few months when I first started working at the law firm in London, so like 25 at the time, called The Monk and the Riddle by Randy Komisar. And his background is, I'm pretty sure he was, it might have been Harvard as well for law school, but he was doing the law school thing and the firm thing, and kind of gave this example of like looking at his life and like looking down the hallway in the law firm and starting out as an associate, and then you work for 40 years, and then your life is you end up at the end of the hall in the senior partner office. And then he basically decided he wasn't going to do that, couldn't do that. and just, kind of started taking some chances in terms of, working with some different companies, kind of walking through open doors, saying yes, taking a few risks, and then ended up in venture, and ended up being a fairly prolific investor, consultant, speaker. And, like for me, that was, 10 years ago. And I'm like, no, that's it. Like, I knew I wanted to do something in investment, but that is definitely it. The freedom that he has, there's an entrepreneurial element. You can still kind of port over some of these other skills. I was like, and just, the way he was talking about how he interacted with companies, how he advised companies, I'm like, that's really exciting. And you don't necessarily need a pure quant type of background to be able to do that. And here's somebody who's charted, kind of had a non-linear path to do it. I was like, just kind of kept that in the back of my mind. Fast forwarding back to, it's about 2018. So, like I said, I had been a partner now for a while, had the privilege of actually having some disposable income to invest. And then I was just thinking like, all right, well, what's next in terms of, from a wealth creation standpoint, from a how I want to spend my time standpoint, from how I want to form my career, because it's so very easy to put my head down. And I was like, I put my head down in this, and I can look up, and X amount of years have passed, and I didn't take the chances that I wanted to take, or go for the things I said I wanted to go for. And then I think it's probably just a byproduct of kind of, reading, various headlines about, startups that were going public at that point, or reaching these crazy valuations. And I was like, okay, ding, ding. Remember the whole venture capital thing that you thought was cool, like almost a decade earlier, like figure that out. And so I'm like, all right, well, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I had, some head start with the legal background in capital markets, because, I'm familiar with term sheets. I'm familiar with private placement memorandums. That's basically all the disclosure when you're making these types of investment, because I'd been the person who drafted those kind of things before. But I did spend some time. I was like, if you're going to go into something, especially going into it cold, because I had, no contacts, and then being in Florida, I was like, you need to understand who the players are and what the language is. So I spent a little bit of time, and like I said, it was a little easier for me because of that background, but just like, all right, I was just, reading articles, whatever random stuff I could Google about, kind of like, okay, what are the key terms to know? And then looking up, different list articles. I was like, all right, like who are the key players? Like, how are they actually executing this? What does this look like? And just trying to build up that knowledge base as best I can, kind of piecing those things together. And then I was like, all right, well, the next step is, I was like, I can't fly out to, San Francisco. Like, I've got to be able to do this from my computer. I was like, but that has to be able to happen. Like, that has to be a thing with technology. And then it ended up stumbling across AngelList, and I got on there. I'm like, this looks pretty credible. Like, some of the deals that I'm seeing, like I recognize, the names that are attached to some of these VC firms, and then I'm seeing these super angels and things that I'm reading about, and Forbes, Fortune, all of that stuff. And I just decided to pull the trigger, and started, in the very beginning, a lot of it was kind of passive investing, investing in that term again, SPVs, where other people were sourcing deals. They were putting together these special purpose vehicles where a bunch of investors could come in and invest as kind of one entity into a company. So I was doing a lot of that in the beginning, which was a great source for learning, because I could sign up for so many of these syndicates, see so many deals. And that's how I learned in the beginning. Even if things felt like so, kind of outside of my comfort zone in terms of what I might have liked to invest in, I still just spent the time to make sure that I read it and understand it, and kind of get a feel for what I like, what I don't like, what's important, what are other people who I think are smart, what are they looking at when they evaluate these in investments, that kind of thing, and kind of use that, to learn. And then from that platform, started, networking and meeting people And then as I became more prolific on that platform, then I was like, oh, now I've got like, invites to demo day. And I'm like, what's an accelerator? I'm like, oh, okay, now let me look up accelerators. And then then I reached out to all the accelerators, and then some of the accelerators started inviting me and sending me deal flow. And then I started, like I said, reaching out and networking, on that platform. And then I, kind of got emboldened and said, okay, well, what if what if I reach out to companies? What if I start being a little bit more public about what I've invested in today in my track record, even though it's really early, but I think there are some good logos here and strong co-investors. So I'm going to literally I'm going to revamp my LinkedIn profile so it looks like I'm an angel investor and people can find me. I'm going to, hop on Squarespace with my limited technical skills and build a website so people can see me building publicly. When people invite me to speak at things, get out of that, because I'm an introvert actually, but I was like, you have to, especially if you're not coming from that world, you got to put yourself out there, and people will pass you by if they don't know what you're doing. So I kind of got out of my comfort zone and this idea of kind of building and investing publicly. And then, ultimately did the syndicate, and that was another way to kind of build publicly. And then then it started shifting. Then you get to a point of, critical mass and deals. And I'm like, oh, wow, now people are reaching out to me for deals. Now founders that I've worked with before are referring me to other, people for deals. And then just, you meet good people along the way, and they tell you about different resources. There's Slack channels with all these different angel investors, and deals and deal flow are flying around. And to your point is, you can't talk to everyone that reaches out to you. I was like, I still have a whole job and life, but I was saying yes as much as you can. So if people were reaching out to me, on LinkedIn, and there might be some synergy, just having conversations and seeing where it goes, and being open to those conversations. And then eventually, you learn about things. And then, I, met someone, I think, on the AngelList platform, and then realized that there were these angel fellowships. And I'm like, okay, what's that? And then I ended up applying. And so I think it was last quarter, I did an angel fellowship with First Round Capital. I did another one called On Deck, which is associated with Village Global. And then, like I said, it's just an avalanche. The deep, more entrenched you get, the more doors kind of open up. The more you say yes, kind of the more doors open up. And I very much approach it as my number one focus is relationships. And that's something that I bring with me kind of from the real estate world. Is I'm not focused in every deal about making the most, because it's all theoretical money, frankly, with angel investing, but making the most theoretical money possible. Because in the long run, I think to have success in this business, it's all about, it's who you know and access. And there are ways to go about, if you put your head down, to getting that access, because that's ultimately going to determine the winners. Is you can be a brilliant person and be able to spot Uber. Doesn't matter if you're not allowed to invest. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how I've approached it. And then my own philosophy is, when you're first getting started, it's so difficult. I didn't know anyone, and and I'm thankful for the folks who, they didn't know who I was or my record, and those who were helpful. And so I do my best to kind of pay that forward.
You said so many valuable things in there, so I just want to highlight a couple nuggets. That the first thing you mentioned was just the players in the language, and I want to we're definitely going to talk more about that in a little bit. But I love that you address that, and also weren't afraid of it either, though, that you didn't really know those things, but you knew kind of how to persevere through that. And that's really the big lesson from what you kind of talked there that I would really like to emphasize for our audience is, whether you're on the investor side or on the founder side, everyone starts at zero. And mm-hmm. and especially in this world, there is so much jargon. And I will, when applicable, I'm definitely going to have you explain syndicate in a little bit, just so you know. When applicable, we'll dive into some of what that jargon means. But I know that is such a large barrier for a lot of founders. where it's just like, oh, I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know how to be in the room even. And and so much of it is just like you said, like, I'm just gonna read some stuff. I'm gonna show up where I can, and I'm gonna potentially have to put my foot in my mouth, but also I'm gonna learn over time. And all of it starts to build. And it certainly mirrors my experience. Like my whole experience in venture capital, Uncrowd, is based on me never feeling like I understood why things happen the way they did or how to talk to people the right way in this space. And then all of a sudden, just like, eventually people started asking me for advice, and I was like, wait a second, when did this happen? Like, when did I become the person in the room that knows some things?
Yeah.
And so it's so much about just putting in the work, which I want to come back to, because it's the other thing that I really love about you as an investor is and I do, we'll get into everything about you as an investor, but I want to just to celebrate you for a second. It's just like, you do the work. Like, you really do the work in a way that a lot of investors wish they did, or a lot of, and I don't want this to be like besmirching the good name of other investors, but highlighting you specifically. Like,
I appreciate that.
you put in so much effort on your deal flow. You put in so much effort. Like, you are somebody that sometimes I send pitch decks to, and I know that you read them. Like, I know that you actually read the pitch decks I send you. And so I just want to acknowledge, like, you might not even, it's possible you don't even recognize how rare that is, but that is like something that is like very cool about you as an investor, is like, you just do the work that it takes to be good.
Yeah, well, no, I definitely appreciate that. And, like I said, one thing about, being an angel versus being a fund, or someone who, has a long, history in doing this, or, doing it for a long time, is, the biggest disadvantage is lack of institutional knowledge. But there are, if you, as you put it, if you do the work, like, okay, no, you're never going to have, 5 MBAs who are dissecting something for you, or you might, depending on how you build that out. But what you do have is the ability to kind of hustle, to read things, and over time, even in a short period of a couple of years, I understand, so much more about markets, different markets, than I ever would have thought I would know, from 2 years ago, from just making sure, like, it's, I won't say I spend at this point the same amount of time kind of like grinding it out reading as I used to, just because now, it's becoming more natural. But I mean, that's how you learn by seeing what's out there, because VCs, they can get a deal and they're like, oh, I've seen 10 companies that do that, it doesn't work for this kind of reason stuff, and then they sound like these sage geniuses, but it's just, they see a lot of deals, a lot of deals. And I was like, and there are some different platforms where, even as an angel, if you're willing to read and put in the time, you can see a lot of deals too. And you can start to pick up on trends, or when something comes across, you understand, okay, I've seen 10 startups doing that, and that could be good. And you're the first one that I've seen who's approaching it this way, and that's why I like it, or whatever else. But yeah, I mean, that's you do what you can to kind of build out that knowledge base.
So now you're working on Flucas Ventures, and it is a syndicate. So can you explain what a syndicate is and how a syndicate operates?
Yeah, so a syndicate is almost like a fancy word for like investment club, because all a syndicate is like a group of people who you're agreeing to send your deal flow to, and they get to opt in to a deal if it's interesting, and you can set it whatever parameters, minimum check size, when a deal is going to close. And then there are kind of multiple ways that you can run your syndicate. So some people literally run their syndicate based off of, they kind of have like a private email, or like an email list, and they blast out to all the people who are in their kind of investment group about an opportunity. And then there are different, different kind of service providers who can handle kind of the legal stuff, the wiring, and all of that back end stuff. And then there are folks like myself. I use like AngelList, who handles all of the back end stuff, like some of these service providers. But what's unique to AngelList versus, if people are doing it via email or other means, is AngelList is also a marketplace of investor, because there are thousands of angel investors and probably hundreds of syndicates who are on angel lists, so you can discover investors and you can be discovered by investors. And so, yeah, like basically all a syndicate is you have a group of people who you agree to send, your deals to. And what that generally looks like is you putting together, and, everyone has their kind of different style about it, but it literally just is, okay, so I meet with a founder, I get a deal, I like it, I think that it's something that my people will respond to. And then, I do the diligence, and then I put together a memo, and it's kind of different. Syndicate leaders have different styles about how long that is, what the contact format. It's completely up to you, because it's about what you need to do to persuade your people and to kind of get the message of the deal across. But you put together a short memo. Usually you'll attach the deck, and then you'll kind of put, the stats of the deal. How much is the round raising overall? How much is our allocation? What's the valuation? Who are the other investors? If there are any notable investors joining the deal, what's their past financing to date? If there's any disclosures that people need to be made aware of, and basically publish that to your group. Set some time for everyone to be able to, independently on their own kind of review the materials you put out. And then people literally just, if they want to go forward, they sign the documentation, e-sign the documentation, and they wire funds. And then whatever service provider you use, like, kind of does all the behind the scenes stuff, gathering the money, and then will eventually help you close the deal. And it's a syndicate, so instead of, I've had some deals where 150 people and different people invested in a lot of smaller checks, but it's not, I'm not sending 150 checks to the company. I'm sending one check, and on their cap table, meaning the list of all the investors and what represents who has ownership, it's just going to appear as one line, and that's usually going to be something named blah 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 company, a series of Flucas Ventures, which is the name of my syndicate. And that's how we all go in onto it. And the other part of a syndicate, it varies. There's no like management fee. There's usually like a setup fee that's paid to the service provider that all the investors kind of pay pro rata based on how much they invested. And then there's like a success fee, meaning if ultimately it goes on and it's successful after the return of the principal investment, your original investment, then whoever syndicated the deal, who put the deal together, takes a fee to share in that upside above and beyond the initial capital investment.
That's great. Question for you, and now I'm spacing on what it was. You said something that I wanted to come back to. If it comes back to me, I will say it. It was a terminology. Oh, that's okay. We'll get back to it. Can you tell us a little bit about your portfolio? Talk about the portfolio that you have, and how big is it right now? What's going on with the companies you've invested in?
Yeah, so I'm a little crazy though. I know a number of people whose portfolios are bigger than mine. I had never would have imagined that I would have done this many companies, but my portfolio is somewhere hovering between like the high 130s in terms of the number of companies since 2018. And I'm also a generalist investor, meaning I don't have, one or two areas where I feel like I have deep domain expertise or that I'm just, laser focused on. And there's different schools of thoughts around that. My own view, I'm a generalist for a couple of reasons. One, I think not having a tech background, I was like, other than, if it was addressing, kind of the law or legal stuff, I'm like, which is, or prop tech. I was like, I'm not going to be a domain expert in most things related to tech, but I don't think that should preclude me from being a tech investor. I'm interested in a lot of different things, so I keep an open mind and realize that I'm not a domain expert. And over time, particularly as you begin to your networks deepen within this, you actually get to meet domain experts. So a lot of times now, I think I'm a better investor because when I see something that's really technical example, or even beyond, kind of what I've learned about, certain sectors. I now know people who I can send it to, who I really trust, who truly are experts, who can kind of look at that side of things. But yeah, and then my other reason for kind of being a generalist and kind of being at the volume that I have, besides that I have arguably an unhealthy addiction to doing it, is that I kind of believe, like, I don't think you need to do anywhere near the scale that I've done, but I do kind of believe in an indexing approach, particularly if you're not some deep subject matter expert. Like, if you're a deep subject matter expert on fintech or something and you want to go down that road, then that might make sense and maybe you'll do really well. But if you're, maybe jack of all trades, kind of like myself, I think kind of similar to public investing, it's good to kind of have an indexing approach where you're exposed to some different industries, maybe even some different stages, in terms of thinking of, the overall return on capital. And much in the same way, that, if you're publicly investing, just because you're in Tesla doesn't mean you go buy all the auto companies. You go buy your Amazons and your your Facebook, whatever you're into, in terms of having that diversification. And for me, looking back in COVID, that strategy has played out really well, because obviously I've had some companies that are struggling as a result of COVID, but some that are really not moved by it, biotech, that kind of thing, which, that have been kind of insulated to it. And then some that have been greatly accelerated by it. But having that basket, and having those diversified, kind of different sectors that I'm in, I think has made the overall, portfolio stronger.
I think that's great, and it's a lot of investments. I'm impressed by it. Is there anyone that, well, I should say, when you were talking about just being a generalist, it reminded me of another investor I know who is a good investor, a very good investor now. He told me that he does not invest at all in his domain expertise anymore. He made too many bad investments early because he thinks he knows the answer to things, and so he stopped doing it. So he had to look for outside sources to help validate his decision making, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, because I agree with that. I think and when you invest in something where you're a domain expert, it can go both ways. Either you get too high about it because you think you know everything about it, or you find yourself, like in my case, I feel like I pass on a lot of the things that I actually really do know, because you know your industry and you can find all the reasons why it won't work, and that's a whole nother kind of segment. But I think it's very important to do in the beginning, and then kind of go as you go along, is try to figure out where your blind spots are, where your biases are, what things that make you overconfident, things that you're underconfident about, because I think you'll be a better investor. There's still a high degree of luck involved in this, like, frankly, no matter how smart you think you are. But knowing the reasons that are powering your decisions, I think, will make you a better investor along the way. And then I think, like, some people get, like you said, really excited because they think they know something so much about a problem space, or because it's something that affects them personally or whatever else. And that doesn't necessarily make it a good company. Or you're thinking about, maybe you like the idea how you would run the company, but how you would run the company is, you're not running the company. The founder's running the company. So you need to consider everything kind of holistically.
Yeah, exactly. And so with your larger portfolio, is there any success stories you want to brag about, or anyone we should be keeping an eye on for 2021?
Yeah, so a few, like, it's very early, but I definitely have several that are doing pretty well. One Bolt, officially with this last raise, within the last few weeks, finally hit unicorn status. So that's pretty cool. But that's, all of the stuff is still kind of monopoly money, for frankly, it's not over till it's over. Another one, Touring. I mean, I invested when they were like barely had any pilots underway, a year and a half or so ago. That one's like a kind of like using like geography arbitrage to build remote teams. Like the idea of like you can find a Google quality engineer in Pakistan or India or Africa, and they don't require Google level salaries and save the company money. They're getting better salaries than they possibly would, locally. And then, leveraging time and all of that. And they went from like zero to insane over the past 12 months because of COVID. So that was another one that's pretty exciting. Quite a few that are doing well. True Pill, which is kind of like pharmacy fulfillment from what I see. They've gone crazy, and could name a few more like that.
Well, that's great. Congratulations. I did remember the question I wanted to ask because it's a good educational moment for the audience.
Mhm.
You mentioned the value of being only one line on the cap table.
Mhm.
Why does that matter? Why do investors like why does it matter to only be one line on the cap table? Why don't you want 125 investors on your cap table?
Well, I think from a founder perspective, from the founder's lawyer's perspective, it's just kind of an administrative burden because something. Okay, so like a basic example, because this happened to me this week. A company that I invested in like 6 months ago. One of the founders of eBay is now coming in after and wants to put in a really large check. And I invested in something called a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity. And all that is in venture is like, it's like, we're going to punt on how much this company is worth. I'm going to give you usually some kind of cap in terms of it won't be, no matter how much is worth, you'll be able to convert at a certain level. And maybe with a discount potentially to the next round. So I invested in that SAFE. We don't know how much the company is worth today, but we agree that no matter what the next round says, I'm going to be investing at this kind of ceiling, which is great for me if the future round is really, really high, because I get to invest at this kind of lower level, which means in layman's term, meaning owning a bigger percentage of the company when you invest when the company is smaller compared to the people who went in later. So that was happening. But to effectuate that transaction, the company had to come back to me and say, hey, like, do you sign off on all the legal documents so that we can get the freaking founder of eBay to invest? And if they had to go back to hundreds of people to do that, that would be an absolute nightmare. Not to mention, just like being realistic, if you are a smaller check, they don't want the administrative burden, or even, frankly, candidly, sometimes to hear an opinion. If you're a smaller check, because they're trying to run a company and do a lot of things, and not getting to the hurdles of someone who invested $1,000 demanding why X, Y, and Z happening. So it's just kind of much easier for them to kind of invest either larger checks or with syndicates, with folks who can kind of be the conduit between them and these larger network of investors. But I do find, like, not everyone loves the syndicate model, but a lot of founders do like it because it is an opportunity to let a lot of great investors with great backgrounds who just don't have the either desire or even the wherewithal to write these huge checks, but can be tremendous value add. So I've definitely got a number of examples where I've syndicated a deal, and then we go on to help the company with introductions, whether that's hiring, whether that's potential partners, potential customers, all of that kind of thing. And it's people who are writing small checks, but they're excited to be a part of something and willing to lend their time, which is more valuable than the money.
I took a few notes there because you said a lot of valuable things. The first one is the most recent one. So talking about the syndicate in general, this is something that I think a lot of founders overlook. Frankly, a lot of founders don't have the choice, to be honest, but having like the value of your investor or your investors, in this case of a syndicate, potentially a lot of investors, is way bigger than the capital that they're providing.
Mhm.
All you want is money, that's fine. But you might end up with some bad investors, some investors that are going to be problematic for you and your business. On the
Mhm.
flip side of that, if you have a syndicate come and invest in you, and all of a sudden you have access to, I don't know, what's the most you've had? 30 people maybe in on a deal, maybe more, I don't know. And if all of a sudden all 30 of these people are technically investors in your company, all of them have some stake in you doing well. And they all have different areas of expertise and they have different networks.
Mhm.
And their willingness to be collaborative in that is going to vary from person to person. But that's a lot of value add beyond the capital that's being added to your company.
Mhm. Yeah, and for certain for certain industries, like folks get really excited about that because a lot of times, not always, like my syndicate, it varies. I've got, everything for people who are just, doctors, lawyers, engineers who just have whatever, or whatever working tech, who just have the disposable income to invest and they like doing it, all the way up to, like tech company, like CEOs and everything in between. But founders, a lot of founders, like that because they're thinking, particularly depending on what the vertical is, like I might have a product that the people in your syndicate can use, or they can convince their company to use. So, a recent example, I syndicated this deal called Matheson. And Matheson is basically like they're backed by that deal. They're backed by Bain. Is like a diversity recruitment platform. So they're basically trying to be. It's not like a LinkedIn style. It's more like an Indeed type of thing, but with some other features that I won't go too far into. But basically, diversity hiring platform. And I put that deal in, and it was mind blowing the number of people who came in, put in checks, and were like, yeah, I went to my company and said we should use this, or trying to get involved. And for and that was a great sell to the founders because they're like, okay, great, like your founders are, I mean, not your founders, but your members are the kind of people who can actually be using this tool.
They're investors and customers. They're doing biz dev.
Exactly. Exactly.
The other thing that I just wanted to share an anecdote with, just line complexity of cap table. The first startup I worked in was a high compliance startup at the state level,
Mhm.
and we needed to get sign offs from everyone on our cap table every time we started doing business in a new state, and that is a nightmare. Of logistics, especially when it's just a small time investor who just wanted to help out somebody. So having a clean cap table is good for everyone involved. And then the last note I wanted to make when you mentioned this was the on the safes. So safes are safe. My experience, please feel free to correct me if you differ, but I find safes to be a little bit regional, more coastal. In the Midwest where I am, we do a lot of convertible notes. They're not all that different. But the thing that's really important, if any founders are exploring these, is the terms on them and how they're written really do matter. And I'm very curious, Ashley, specifically as a lawyer and an investor on this side. I have heard stories firsthand from investors who wanted to invest in a startup but didn't because they didn't like the way the safe was written and were concerned about the way that the previous safe had been written. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I haven't had much experience with the safes kind of not being kind of plain vanilla. So for the most part, when we say safes, people are using the same form that was pioneered by Y Combinator. You can literally go on their website and download their safe, and they've got some other documents as well. And for the most part, most companies take that maybe with some small tweaks, so there aren't really surprises. But yeah, I mean, I've heard but not experienced that of course you can run into a document and there are some exotic terms that you're not comfortable with, so you can't take it for granted. You do have to read it, or have someone that you trust who kind of understands that language around it, who can glance over it. And you don't have to have a legal background, I think, to get up to speed with kind of the things that you really need to pay attention to, and what's important. And just being a smart person, like your spidey sense will sometimes kick in about like, that sounds a little strange that they can do that, and you can and then you ask you ask questions. But If someone's deviating greatly from the form, that might tell you something about the company itself anyway, in terms of evaluating the investment. But you're right. Another form you'll see sometimes is convertible debt, and all that basically means is, again, eventually, based on whatever terms, there might be some small interest that they're paying or something like that. There might also be a discount to the future rounds, but there are certain terms that dictate when that debt can eventually convert to equity.
I'm going to change gears a little bit, and I want to talk ecosystem for a second and your role within that ecosystem. So, venture capital is exceedingly led by straight white guys on the coasts. Um, you are none of those things. Um, so, can you talk to me just a little bit about your experience as a woman of color from the South who is out coming into this world that is just like dominated by straight white dudes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't have that, specific experience going into venture, but in some ways that was like, that's always kind of, been my life, in terms of, going to, predominantly white, colleges, that kind of thing, working at the law firms I did. I'm kind of used to be like sticking out like a sore thumb. So I think going in, I kind of had some, comfortability around that. And until things change, like to a degree, you have to have some comfortability around that. And you have to kind of go into it like, there are going to be things that you can't control what you're excluded from, right? But you have to kind of go in with the mentality of you belong. And that there's no secret to this. There's no knowledge or skill set that they have that you don't have. They have some privilege and access. But as I've been trying to talk about, there are ways to eventually kind of hack that and take advantage of different opportunities. And like I said, my thing is you can spend a lot of time telling yourself all the ways that you don't fit in, all the skills that you think that you don't have that would preclude you from being in this world. And you do have to be realistic about what your strengths and weaknesses are. I'm not somebody who's going to go in and be able to help you, your whatever tech company iterate on product. And I'm not even going to BS you and pretend like I can. But what I try to focus on are the things that I'm good at. And even if you're not from a tech background, you have some skill set, or you have some diversity of thought or opinion. For me, so like I kind of like started, leading with that as I built my portfolio kind of in the background of like, look, I'm not anything like anyone that you invest with, but I think that's a good thing because I'm out of the echo chamber. I have a completely different perspective. I in the real estate world, like as like things aren't made, like the way we think about business is different, but some of that might actually be good for you. That's kind of out of the typical perspective. And I found that actually was like a lot of people were refreshed by that and like that. Another thing too is people take money from and work with people that they like. And a lot of some of those people you described are, forgive me, like mediocre and assholes. And
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
and so
yeah,
it's like being a person that people like and taking interest and being vested can also get you a long way. And sticking out can make you interesting. It can make people want to have a conversation with you because they haven't seen you before and they want to know what your story is. And in the background, you're kind of building that track record and everything else. And then now, like I said, in the beginning, kind of my superpower was like that, like I said, that kind of voice outside of Silicon Valley. But now, because I've done the level of investment that I have, because I've joined these different communities, now my other power is now I can actually be a connector. And you can't do that from day one because you go in with no connection, but over time that web builds and I'm like, oh, a startup comes to me like, actually, like, I'm not saying I have the world's biggest Rolodex or anything, but I was like, I now have some VC relationships. So I was like, oh, I can actually get you in front of, X, Y, and Z. or I can introduce you to this other founder, or I can introduce you to this other or a company, or I saw this product because I funded them or came across them that would be super helpful for you, and start thinking in those ways. And then, what's not so secret about this business is a lot of things are reliant on signal. So that's a word you'll probably hear a lot. And signal just means I'm following. And that happens in a lot of different ways in terms of investors will get signal on the deal because great and other investors are going in that deal and they all heard to that deal. I think it also goes the other way when you are an investor as well. When you build up a good track record, a good portfolio, when you have a good reputation, people want you in their deal for that reason. And they also want to use you to attract other people within the ecosystem. So eventually it could start to kind of flip on its head.
I think that's very, very well said. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, as we try to, I use the collective we, the world, as we try to make this world more equitable, more accessible, more inclusive.
Mhm.
Do you think that happens from within? Do you think the existing VC ecosystem as it exists can open up and be more inclusive, or do you think change is going to come from outsiders, some combination of both? What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, you're seeing so a couple of different things are going up, but I do think it's going to be kind of like almost any movement. It's the real power is kind of from the bottoms up, right?
Mhm.
And I think who writes the check determines who gets funded. And so I think like what will have to change is more diverse check writers will lead to more diverse people getting funded, frankly. And you're starting to see some movement with VCs. Obviously, last year there was kind of a rush for all these opportunity funds and things like that. And that's cool. I'm not really a huge, I mean, I'm not saying get the money if it's available to you. Let me say that. But I'm going to say, like,
Yeah.
philosophically, I'm not a huge fan of them because I don't even like the idea that investing in women and people of color and people from the LGBT community is separate from your core thesis and your fund. I don't like anything that construes it as charity, anything like that. So I'm not a big fan of that. And like when I invest, I don't have a diversity mandate in terms of like, I'm only going to invest in companies with diverse founders, but I also don't have any bias. So when I'm looking at a company, I'm really looking at the company. And because I'm not filtering out women and people of color and people from the LGBT community, it just so happens that most of the companies that I fund, the people come from, or even immigrants come from underrepresented communities, and it maybe even goes the other way. I see that as a boon because, from my own, lived experience, I know how hard it is to get to that point where you can stand out, and what you kind of have to go through to be even at the point where you could be in a room asking people for millions of dollars, and the reactions that you're getting and the obstacles you have to climb. So for you to build to the point where your company is ready for these kind of things, like I take that, as an absolute positive. But like I said, going back for things to change, I think there have to be more people in positions of power who are kind of who pull those levers and make those decisions and write those checks. And so I'm definitely seeing that on the syndicate side of things, where when I even from less than a year ago when I started, I knew like I said, out of backing hundreds of syndicates like within the AngelList platform, I think I knew like 3 women who had syndicates, and the other 400 were men. I didn't know, I didn't see any Latinx people doing it, didn't see any Black people doing it, any of that. And then, but I actually have started to see some of that in recent months, and that was part of my motivation to doing it. Is I was like, I wanted to be visible. I wanted to show that it wasn't like it's not like easy. It's not like you snap your fingers and do it, but it's also really not that like mystical. Like it's a part of it is like getting started. So I was like, I hope if I do it and other people see like, okay, like I can do it too. And so that was my thing. And then, like I said, because it's my syndicate and I get to decide who I want to fund. So helping in that way. And so I'm definitely seeing an increase of that level of activity. Then you've also got something called the diversity rider. And that was pioneered by,
That is. Can you
huh?
talk? Can you talk about what the diversity rider is for a second?
Yeah, so that was started by a venture firm called Act One Venture, and actually Act One Ventures, and he's ended up signed. A bunch of firms have signed up to it with, varying degrees of how much they hold themselves to it. But I have seen some who seem to be taking it pretty seriously. But the idea here is, it's something that venture firms will pledge to when they're funding a company. They actually put it as a rider, meaning a term within the term sheet saying that, the language varies how it's written, but basically the company, and they'll help the company, will use, reasonable efforts to make sure that there are diverse check writers who are part of that round, meaning, people of color, women, and try to carve out some allocation, including sometimes in deals that are pretty hot deals that ordinarily those kind of funds would want to take the whole round and then some, and are elbowing each other out about who can be in, but they're carving out some some amount for diverse check writers to come in. And I've definitely seen a few different funds who seem to be taking that pretty seriously. Bain, actually, Graycroft, and a couple of others who are really making an effort there. Now, the key with that will also be making sure, like, the next level of that is, trying to figure out some kind of equitable distribution, because the easiest thing to do is, oh, I have a Black friend, so I'm going to send them all of my deals, versus actually try to make sure, like, we're bringing up, a new generation of, diverse investors. But there have definitely been, some signs of life and positive signs about diversity. But I mean, it's still going to be a Herculean effort to get it where it needs to be. And it's going to start, in my opinion, like, funds are going to do some stuff. They're going to do a lot of stuff that's largely symbolic, but like I said, kind of the ground up stuff, the people who are hustling, the people who are like yourselves, who are community building, and become kind of a first line of funding, a first line of resources for company. And that's the way we'll break in, by coming in early and kind of banding together.
I'm really glad to hear that you feel like you're seeing some meaningful change. I can tell you, I personally have been really conflicted about the opportunity funds or the earmarking of dollars at a base level, like at a core level. Obviously, I'd rather that capital go into the hands of underrepresented founders than not. But I totally agree. Like, I just don't love the optics of it, and I worry about, like, why it's being presented that way. And frankly, sometimes I'm like, don't even spend the money on the PR campaign. Just give those dollars to a founder who doesn't have them. Like, just give those dollars away. Don't tell us what you're going to do. Just do it. Just go do it. There's plenty of founders you can give money to.
Yep.
All right. I am going to try to do I have some quick questions that I know matter to founders, that I just want to bounce off of you and get your thoughts, that I know are helpful for founders to hear, especially from an investor. So one thing a lot of founders don't realize is that investors have to pass up on ideas they like a lot of time. So can you give me some reasons that you as an investor would not invest in a good idea, or something you're even excited about, but you still wouldn't invest? Why does that happen?
And sometimes, which is the really hard part, with underrepresented founders, is because underrepresented founders don't tend to get funded a lot of times at the idea phase, and a lot of times they don't have the networks to friends and family and raise whatever money to build out an MVP, but have solid ideas. And so, I mean, that's a whole nother subject, but, figuring out how to kind of address that to get good ideas off the ground, but also appreciating, as a non-institutional investor, as an angel investor, I can't always bridge that gap either, because particularly if I'm not syndicating, I was like, it's my literal own money, kind of taking a shot that early. But, some reasons to pass is, obviously people get funded pre-seed, but I mean, it's very difficult sometimes when things are really just at that kind of formative idea stage, and you need some kind of, here's that word again, signal, to indicate to you why you should be taking that early sometimes. And like, I know it's like, crazy bouncing around. You're looking for, okay, are there other, domain experts or other angel, not even like necessarily looking for funds, but other angels who I trust, who are smart in this space, who I can trust have taken a chance on it. Or do I think, like, beyond your idea? Like for me, I obsess on, like, have you figured out how you're actually going to distribute it, even if you haven't? Because I think if you figured out something clever that way, I can get there in terms of how you'll get there. Yeah, something else that that comes up is, like, some things are like awesome ideas, but they're just not venture scale. And that happens a lot, where you're like, this is a great deal, this is a great idea that will probably make you money, but it's not the kind of thing that a venture capital investor is looking for. This is maybe something that if I put my money in and you kill it, maybe I can make 10 times my money, but this asset class is too risky to be chasing 10 times your money. Only time you're chasing 10 times your money is when it's like a sure thing and it's late stage and you're at the end, and then maybe you're happy with 10 times your money because it's severely de-risked, as opposed to early stage investing. And then sometimes, and this is really kind of only applicable to the syndicate model, sometimes I'm excited about a deal, I'm excited about a founder, and I'm like, you know what, it's just not kind of checking all of those boxes that I think the other people who are in my syndicate are going to want to see, because it is a little early as far as traction and the round coming together, and sometimes it sucks. I kind of have to pass on that. But there could be myriad reasons. It's a great idea, but you're a solo founder, and maybe this is the kind of thing where you need to have your team together. I feel like you need a co-founder. So like put it this way, like the idea is not enough, because there are plenty of there's a graveyard of great ideas, and that sometimes that go on to go into fruition years later, and there are plenty of actually pretty mediocre ideas that end up being great investment, because these folks know how to market, they know how to distribute, everything else like that. And there are plenty of things that aren't earth-shattering. I mean, people are IPOing selling mattresses. Like, you don't have to have a genius idea. So it's a little bit more of like, ideas matter, but some of those other things around it are sometimes equally, if not more important.
That's really helpful. I'm sure there are a lot of founders that appreciate hearing that. Thinking to early interactions with founders, so whether that's through pitch deck or through first conversations, what do you wish you saw more from founders? What do you wish you saw less from founders?
Pitch decks and early conversations. Yeah, I've seen so many, but I guess the best kind of decks, the best pitches. There's this phrase you'll hear a lot, and it's kind of my like unifying investment thesis, even though it's a bit broad. But this idea of category creation and the best founders, you get that sense of what that is right away. The worst ones didn't do a good enough job of making that clear. And so, I'll unpack what that means. When I say category creation, I want to understand why you're gonna own the solution for the problem that you're solving. And I want you to be able to communicate so articulately, no matter how high tech your thing is, that you could talk to an 8th grader and they would understand what that problem is and why it's a problem for the end user or in business, even if it's not their specific personal problem. So the best founders do that, because like I said, obviously I'm a generalist. I've invested in some things that I would have like in autonomy and freaking autonomous flying vehicles and all kind of crazy stuff that are so outside of something that I would be thinking I could wrap my mind around. But I was able to get comfortable, besides obviously from a diligence standpoint, because I was like, the way you've articulated that problem and the way you've articulated how you're going to own that solution makes me feel like you have the potential to own that category. And so classic examples that people use. You don't say, I'm going to go call a ride share. I'm going to call it Uber. I'm going to call it Lyft. They own that. The category is ride share. They created it and then they owned it. And usually the best companies, the companies that have those outsized outcomes, those outlier returns, are because you do have to become synonymous with that category. And so ideally you're creating a category, or you've figured out something product or distribution wise in a category that no one owns, that's going to allow you to own it. And there's so many examples. I'm sure if you think about it within tech, of things like, they aren't new spaces. I mean, like used cars, Carvana, Vroom, but they had a way to take ownership of those categories. And so for me, that's the most kind of compelling story that you can be telling us. Like, whatever problem I'm solving, it's huge. It's worth billions. We're thinking big, because again, you want to be selling an angel investor or a VC on a venture size outcome. They're not looking to double their money, to triple their money. They want to have a vision that they can make 100 times or more on their money. And it's kind of a shoot for the moon, land on the stars type of thing in terms of where they actually end up. But it's that big vision. And then there's your plan to actually kind of own that category.
That is an absolute gem. That is such good advice. I was watching just some of the attendees start taking notes when you start talking about category creation. That's such a gem. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Last question from me. What do you do for fun?
There's COVID fun, and then there's that imaginary life from like a year ago fun. So before life was what it is today, my number one passion was actually traveling. I definitely caught the bug, starting back from living abroad in London and kind of having that access where on weekends I could hop all over inexpensively in Europe. But I love to travel. I've been to like 80 countries, and I don't know how many cities. So like, that's my number one thing. Outside of that, I'm a huge basketball fan. So Duke, of course, because of undergrad, but watch and attend NBA games, that kind of thing. But yeah, those are two of the bigger things. But in a COVID world, it's like I'm either doing this or I'm boring. I'm just watching Netflix or something.
I'm trying to do the math in my head, or the geography in my head. Are you a Magic fan? Are you a Heat fan? Who's your team?
For college, Duke, absolutely loyal allegiance. For the NBA, there's so much movement that I'm kind of more attached to kind of players than I am any specific team. So I was like, I'm cool with the Florida teams, but I never grew up like kind of die hard. So I'm like a huge LeBron fan. So okay. Lakers. But in terms of games that I go to, like I spent a lot of time in Atlanta, so I had like Hawks tickets, who absolutely suck. And then my company has Nets tickets, which are now, but for COVID would be amazing tickets.
Yeah, so that's awesome. I mean, that's a nice little perk there. Yeah. I'm going to turn it over to a short little Q&A. I did get one question in advance from someone who's attending, and I don't know if I have permission to use their name, so I'll just keep it anonymous. But she was curious to get your thoughts, and you touched on this a little bit, but specifically investing pre-rev around CPG. And knowing that you've done some consumer product investing, have you either through your syndicate, based on what you said earlier, I would guess not, but have you personally done any pre-rev investing, and what do you look for to make a pre-rev investment if you have?
Pre-revenue investing, yes, but it depends on the sector. So something like biotech, not going to be expecting you to be generating revenue. Something like anything like deep tech, not going to be expecting you to generate revenue. There are a couple of other things like that, but with consumer, no, I don't pre-revenue. And I like, there's some people who are due, but again, that's what I kind of backed off of. Like, I'm not a domain expertise, and I sure as hell, I cannot read the room in terms of like what's hot and what's trending, even though I really love the category. So I was like, I need to see some kind of signal. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be doing millions of revenue or anything like that, but I need to get a look and feel for your product. I need to, because like, as I said, one of the things that I like to understand is distribution. So I kind of need to see that out in the wild and see how you're actually going about kind of handling that. So no, I won't do CPG pre-revenue. I know some people who do, but I like to see some revenue, before I go CPG. But I do like the category. I've invested in some things like pretty early that were too early to syndicate, because again, I'm like, okay, some of the like distributor relationships and stuff you acquired, I'm like, that's not normal to be doing this early. And so that says something to me about you as a founder. And I really like your plan to distribute this. You're maybe doing something that's not typical in terms of, you're just out here buying Google and Facebook ads. So something like that will make me get involved early. And then even with things in consumer, I still think you can kind of apply those principles of like category creation. So even it can literally be like, I've done like several beverage deals, and like there's nothing special about your coffee or your coffee replacement or water, like no disrespect for those products, but I'm like, the way you're going about positioning this product is you're creating a category, and it stands out from even as crowded as something as beverage may be. And that'll give me some comfort about what you might be able to do, and kind of an insight as to how you might be able to take a CPG business and scale it to a venture outcome. Because a lot of tech investors don't like CPG because a lot of them don't get to venture scale outcome, but there are definitely examples of CPG companies getting to 300, 400, 500 billion dollar valuations, but they've really got to nail the rest of that stuff.
There's something I just love about a tangible product too. I think there's something like, I just love being able to hold something. I think it's special. Adam is my co-founder with Uncrowd, and he's been kind of moderating the chats. Adam, is there any, I'm going to let you decide, like kind of guide the Q&A. Is there anything that you want to start with from a question perspective?
Yeah, so we have a few questions and they're all semi-related, so it'll be a good start. So the first question is, what's the top 3 things a venture should have to be an attractive target in your opinion?
Top 3 things a venture should have to be an attractive target. I think I kind of touched on that in the beginning of. One is someone like going in, you defined a category, and it is a potentially massive category in terms of owning that solution. And sometimes for more sophisticated like VC funds, that's actually even a direct question you'll get, like, what category are you in? Yeah. And knowing how to answer that question. Number 2, you could obviously be very early, but the other thing I was alluding to, you'll hear this term a lot, of product market fit. And I don't know how else to describe that term of like it's like, I've got evidence that this thing is going to work, that people are going to buy it. That's all that really means. And they've made it a fancy term. So how can you signal that, particularly when you're really early? And so I said, for me, one way that I think about that is I think about, how are you planning to distribute this thing, whether you're B2B, B2C, whatever. How are you actually going to be able to get this into the end user's plan? What's your plan for that? But you want some evidence of product market fit if you're not mature and you're not already at some kind of significant, recurring revenue. I guess that was 2 things. The third thing, I think something else that I alluded to is like the strength of your team. And so particularly, like I said, for those solo founders out there, like being aware of what your strengths are and being aware what your weaknesses are, and plugging those gaps. And you'll different people have different philosophies on teams, but you will see quite a number of funds. And at the end of the day, particularly really early, the bet is the team. And you know, a lot of the best VC shots will tell you like this thing I invested in, it came in and it was kind of an idea and they were molding, and the eventual product ended up being so different from where they started, but the early bet was on that team. So aside from your strength, making sure that you assemble the best possible team around you. That if you have co-founders, that they're not just duplicating your strengths, that they're filling in those weaknesses, because like I said, particularly early on, for a lot of people, the bet is on team, because the idea is probably going to go through several iterations, or you maybe can't get to figuring out quite if there's that quote product market fit.
That's great, Ashley. Adam, anything else that you want to touch on?
Yeah, the other big thing is, so since you have so many investments, or have gone through, so it's 130 plus since 2018, how do you keep track of them all?
Yeah, how do you manage your portfolio? How do you address your founders?
I'm still out here looking for the software or tool that does that. I've been pitched by a couple of startups that are looking to offer just those products. But I was like, I'm going to be just open, like blunt with you guys. I am not an institutional investor. I do not have a team. Like if I were a VC, I would have junior people beneath me who could do all of that and bubble it up to the top. The reality is, if you get beyond a certain critical mass, you can't possibly track it all. You kind of do the best you can. You use whatever internal systems work for you, but it's frankly not feasible. And you know, the other side of angel investing, unless you're going deep with a company, if you're an advisor or you have a special relationship with that company, I mean, it really waxes and wanes, and it's very different company to company, just how deep your involvement is going to be. In a lot of cases, you're not a fund, you're not a major investor, you're probably not even getting any kind of information rights, and you might be beholden to the company just in terms of how transparent they are. And so I have some companies that are great and they do their monthly or their quarterly reporting, and I'm like, okay, great. Like I see ARR is up, and based on, you know, kind of multiples for the industry, I could maybe start to infer valuation, or I'm seeing what's coming in terms of future rounds. But I'm going to be really honest with you. There's a lot of companies where you're kind of, you know, in the dark about what's really going on, and you have to be comfortable with that discomfort.
That's great. All right, I think I am going to cut it off there. So I know you're on the East Coast. We can let you go to bed. I have just a couple things to run through. Thank you so much, Ashley. If anyone wants to check out Ashley's website, it's flucasvc.com. You can go there. You can see it. You have your whole portfolio listed out there. It's a nice site. It keeps things organized. So thank you so much for joining us today. Coming up in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing another one of these investor chats with a guy. Bye, Ashley. Thank you. Have a good night. We're going to be doing another investor chat with a gentleman named Grady Buchanan. He is Chief Investment Officer at NVNG. He's also the founder of OmniValley, which is a software product that connects investors. So that's going to be February 9th at 9 p.m. Eastern, so 2 weeks from tonight. Adam will put the registration link for that in the chat if you want to join us for that. More conversations like the one we had tonight. I had Ashley there. As a reminder, we're uncrowd.io. We connect underrepresented founders with investors. So if you're not on the platform, we would love to have you. This conversation will end up added to our content hub. Basically, we're just trying to make entrepreneurship more accessible. So we have a content hub. It's uncrowd.webflow.io. Any of our conversations that we do will end up there. So if you ever miss one, you can always join there. And if you have any contributions, we're highlighting founders, we're telling stories. I see a couple founders here that joined us that we've done some highlighting of. We'd love to tell your story. And if you're interested, you can reach out to Adam, our COO, Adam at uncrowd.io. And that is it. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all being here tonight. I hope you found this valuable. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening.